Welcome back. So last time, we looked at the most obvious way capital can squeeze out more profit. Just make the workday longer. Simple, right? But what happens when you hit a wall? When the day literally has no more hours to give? Well, today, we're diving into capital's much sneakier and frankly more brilliant strategy, a secret engine called relative surplus value. Here's our game plan. First, we'll quickly recap why just extending the day runs into trouble. Then, we'll follow Marx's logic step by step. We're going to see how one capitalist search for an edge kicks off this whole chain reaction. We'll watch that personal advantage get wiped out by competition, and then, this is the really cool part, we'll uncover where the lasting, system-wide profit actually comes from. Okay, so before we get into the relative kind of surplus value, we've got to be rock solid on what the absolute kind is. This is our foundation. It's the brute force method, and it really sets the stage for the much more subtle game we're about to explore. At its core, the capitalist workday is sliced in two. There's necessary labor. That's the chunk of time you work to earn your keep, to basically pay for your own wages. But anytime you work beyond that point, that's surplus labor. That's the free work you're doing for the boss, and that's where their profit is born. Getting this division is absolutely crucial.
So if you accept that division, the simplest way to get more profit is just to stretch out the surplus labor part. You do that by making the entire workday longer. If it takes 6 hours for a worker to cover their wage, a 10-hour day gives you 4 hours of surplus. But you push it to a 12-hour day, boom, you get 6 hours. That extra profit gained just by stretching the clock is what Marx calls absolute surplus value.
Yeah, but there's a pretty big catch. This strategy has hard limits. First, there's a physical limit. A day only has 24 hours. Then you have social limits. Workers organize, they fight back. And eventually, you get legal limits, like factory acts, that put a hard cap on the workday. So capital needs another way. It hits a dead end. And that forces the really interesting question. If you can't make the day longer, how do you get more out of it? The answer is just genius. It's not about adding time at the end of the day. It's about fundamentally changing the proportions inside the existing day. This is where the system gets really sophisticated. And this is Marx's answer, relative surplus value. The strategy shifts entirely. You stop trying to extend the whole day, and instead you attack the other part, the necessary labor time. The goal is to shrink the time it takes for a worker to earn their wage, because if you can do that in a fixed workday, the surplus labor time automatically expands to fill the gap. See? It's not about a longer day, it's about a cheaper worker. Now, here's a really subtle but critical point. This whole process doesn't happen because all the capitalists get in a room and agree on a plan. No. It starts with just one capitalist trying to get a leg up on the competition. And to see how that works, we first have to get this distinction between how one producer sees value and how the market as a whole does. So on the one hand, you have individual value. That's the actual time and effort it costs you, the producer, to make a thing. But the market doesn't care about your personal struggles. It runs on social value. That's the average time it takes to make that thing across the whole industry. And it's that social average that really sets the price. Okay, so watch how a clever innovator can play this gap. Let's say a capitalist installs a fancy new machine that lets them double their output. As you can see here, the individual value of their product gets cut in half. But, and this is key, the social value for the whole industry hasn't changed yet. So for a short time, our innovator is in the sweet spot. They're producing at a very low cost, but they get to sell at the old high market price. This gap between their low cost and the high market price is a gold mine. It's a temporary super profit. They're basically pocketing the difference between their own high-tech efficiency and everyone else's old-fashioned average. And the best part for our innovator is that they can even drop their price a little bit to crush their rivals and still make an extra profit. In Marx's example, they sell for 10 pence. Now that's below the social value of a shilling, but it's way above their personal cost of 6 pence. So they grab market share, all while making a profit margin their competitors can only dream of. But this beautiful moment for the innovator, it can't last. It's a fleeting advantage. Because the machinery of competition itself is about to kick in and turn one person's private gain into a new public standard. And here's how that ripple effect works. First, the innovator is making bank, and everyone sees it. Then, competition forces everyone else's hand. Other capitalists have to adopt the new technology, or they'll be driven out of business. As that new method spreads, it stops being special. It becomes the new normal. The social value of the commodity then drops to meet this new, more efficient reality. And just like that, the innovator's extra profit is gone.
The playing field is level again, but the whole game is now being played at a much higher level of productivity.
So this creates a bit of a puzzle, right? If competition just erases the innovator's extra profit, then how does this whole process actually increase profit for the capitalist class as a whole? I mean, where is the lasting gain?
And here it is. This is the absolute pivot of the entire argument. The lasting effect isn't guaranteed. It only happens if the commodity that got cheaper is a means of subsistence. We're talking about things workers actually need to live: food, clothing, housing. The productivity revolution has to lower the costs of keeping your workforce alive and ready to show up tomorrow.
Let's just quickly remember a concept we've covered before. The value of labor power, which is what the wage is based on, is determined by the value of the necessities it takes to keep a laborer going. So it logically follows, if you can make those necessities cheaper, you make the value of labor power itself cheaper.
Let's visualize this. Think about our fixed 12-hour day. In our before picture, let's say necessary labor takes up 6 hours. The worker has to work for 6 hours to earn their wage. The other 6 hours? That's surplus labor for the capitalist. It's a nice, even 50-50 split.
But now, look at the after picture. A whole wave of innovation has made food and clothing cheaper. The value of labor power falls. Now, the worker only needs, say, 4 hours of necessary labor to cover their wage. But remember, the workday is still fixed at 12 hours. So what happens to those 2 hours they saved? They're automatically gobbled up by the surplus labor portion. The split is now 4 and 8. The entire capitalist class has just received a massive boost in surplus value, all without adding a single second to the workday.
And this constant push to revolutionize production, well, it has huge, huge consequences. It ends up shaping the entire logic and direction of the capitalist system itself.
So let's just trace that logic one final time. It all starts with one capitalist's selfish desire for a temporary extra profit. But competition spreads their innovation. And if that innovation cheapens the cost of living, it then lowers the value of labor power for everybody. This creates this relentless, impersonal drive to constantly revolutionize production. This is the hidden engine of technological change and capitalism. The whole thing works like an impersonal force of nature. No single capitalist really intends for this system-wide outcome to happen. But as Marx puts it, they are all forced by the law of value, acting as a coercive law of competition to play their part. It's the system structure, not necessarily individual evil, that drives this whole thing forward.
Which brings us to a final, pretty provocative thought. We've just seen how the production of relative surplus value is a process that's totally indifferent to the workers' well-being. Its real aim is just to make their labor progressively cheaper. So what are the ultimate consequences of a system whose core logic depends on this continuous devaluation of human work itself? And on that question, we'll leave it for today.